So if you've seen the recent polling, it shouldn't come as a surprise that Bernie Sanders is popular amongst millennials, young people more generally, however you want to define them. And we've known this for a while. We've known this since at least the 2016 campaign, that Bernie Sanders personally was extremely popular with young people. And we see that in this recent polling, that despite a very large field, with some relatively young candidates in that field, Bernie Sanders leads and leads by a wide margin over all other challengers. And if you exclude Joe Biden, who is, of course, has not declared yet, he is very, very far ahead of other key challengers like Beto O'Rourke, for instance. So it's we have to really talk about why Bernie is popular amongst young people. And I just want to put forward a couple key factors. It's not because young people want stuff for free. It's not because young people are, looking for easy solutions. I've heard a lot of centrist Democrats say this, that they're feeding into Bernie Sanders' populism, quote unquote, and they just want the easy ride, and Bernie is telling young people what they want to hear, and the serious Democrats are telling them what they need to hear, and that's why they're not listening. That's why they're not resonating as much, because they're telling the hard truths, the hard truths that young people need to hear. But the reality is that it's more than that. The first major factor is Bernie is speaking to the needs of young people. He's speaking to the needs of young people broadly defined. The need for education, the need for healthcare, the need for opportunity, the desire to fight things like climate change and racism and homophobia and other forms of discrimination that I think a lot of people obviously have issues with, but that young people, I think, more than average are aware of, are sensitive to. And so Bernie Sanders speaks to the broad concerns of regular young people, the broad working and middle class young people who look at what their parents and their grandparents had and say, why can't we have those things? Especially when we are more highly educated, we work longer hours, we have just as much drive. Why aren't the same opportunities there for us? And Bernie Sanders speaks to that. But I think I want to really focus on one key aspect here, which is that Bernie, despite the fact that he's one of the oldest candidates that you're going to see in the race, that Bernie is, extremely old relative to his millennial base, is that they're a match made in heaven in terms of sandwiching the neoliberal era. I put it another way, Bernie Sanders isn't a boomer. He isn't Gen X. He isn't a millennial, obviously. Bernie Sanders is born of an older generation, a generation that was born before the Second World War, and a generation that grew up, in the kind of golden age of that you saw in Canadian and American society. That, after the war had vanquished the Great Depression, yet before the rise of the neoliberal consensus in the late, mid-1970s to early 1990s, depending on how you want to define it. And millennials, well, we know nothing but neoliberalism. That's all we know. We know nothing but it. We know nothing but this consensus that, nothing better is possible, that, the only solution is to privatize, or the only goal that the left should have is to try to preserve certain programs in certain cases, but to never dare dream to build new social programs and new forms of universal assistance, be it through education or pharmaceuticals or what have you. That, the best we can hope for is a sort of Clinton, Blairite, third way that, merely seeks to, add a progressive veneer to what is a deeply rotten and unequal and unfulfilling society that's existed since, the 1980s for a generation and a half. So those of us like myself who are 32, or younger, we know nothing but this neoliberal era. From the time we were teenagers, that was the political status quo. And so now we look to boomers, we look to Gen Xers, we look to those political leaders, and they're enmeshed in that system. Some of the older ones of those, they might remember as youth this pre-neoliberal era, but they all became politically prominent and politically powerful during this period. And so there are relatively few Boomer and Gen X democratic socialists in the Democratic Party. And so this is why I think Bernie is so important, why people like Jeremy Corbyn in Britain are so important. They are long-serving democratic socialists who have impeccable records, who have generational credibility, and who know of and can articulate a vision that existed before neoliberalism and apply it to a different world, but one which faces similar challenges that we've been facing for the last 50 years and more. Issues of inequality, issues of precarity, issues of ensuring basic human rights and basic human needs are provided to all people. That's why Bernie is so special to young people, I think. I think that's why he speaks to me. You know, he remembers this era, and he's offering us a vision. In some ways, he's the young people's bridge to a different world, a way of doing politics and economics differently. It's not necessarily very radical. Again, it's something that's in part rooted in the past. But Bernie's vision is something that many boomers and Gen Xers just never learned or refused to learn. And so it's his torch is being picked up not by his children, not the children and not his children's generation, but his grandchildren, their generation. And that's what's so special. So this is why millennials love Bernie, I feel. He speaks to their need, he speaks to their desires, and he articulates a vision of a society that until he came to prominence, young people just didn't know about. It was not on their political horizon. So this very old man, this white old man, crazy hair, not exactly the sharp young image of change that you might expect, in 2016, nonetheless is a radical transformation for young people, because he is proof that politics has been done differently, is being done differently, and can be done differently. And it's not a coincidence that on the one hand, you have him, and then you have other young leaders like Ocasio-Cortez, bridging that gap that the Gen Xers and baby boomers largely left us. That's where democratic socialism is going to come from. It's going to require 21st century solutions, but it's going to require inspiration from Bernie Sanders' generation. And I think it's going to make for an interesting political cocktail. And I think that's why Bernie has this deep, loyal support from young people. And I don't see that going away anytime soon. So if you like this video, guys, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'd appreciate it if you share it with your friends. I cover Canadian politics and American politics from a left perspective, so you'll be seeing a lot more Bernie Sanders analysis as we get closer to the actual primaries. So I'll see you guys next time.